Hey everybody, happy Sunday night to you. Thank you so much for tuning in for our second installment of our Sunday Q&A series. Last week, if you were with us, it was just me. We were previewing the General Assembly session that kicked off in Richmond on Wednesday. And this week, I am so thrilled to be joined by my colleague in the House, Delegate Sam Rasoul, who is running for Lieutenant Governor. Sam, how are you tonight?
I'm great. Thank you so much, Sally, for inviting us to be part of your conversation this Sunday evening.
Well, I know that you are someone who values constituent engagement tremendously, just like me. And so this is just one way that we can stay engaged with folks from afar since we can't gather together. You know, if I know that both of us under normal times would be going home each weekend from Richmond and checking in with folks and telling them how things are going and getting their feedback. So this is the closest thing that we can do for now. For folks who are just coming in, let me sort of give you a rundown of what we'll be doing here. We have two different spots where you can watch us tonight. You can watch us streaming on YouTube and then also on Facebook Live. And there are spots in both of those platforms for you to leave questions. So I will be watching your questions as we're talking and taking those all in so that we can get those questions answered for you. I've got a few questions that I would love to ask Sam to get us started so that you can start to get to know him. But we'll start to incorporate those questions from you over time as we keep talking. Maybe let me say just a little bit before I pass it off to him about how I came to know Sam and why I'm so excited for him to get to know everyone in the Charlottesville and Albemarle community. As you know, I have only been serving in the House for a year now, but Sam was one of the few people who I knew before I ran. I had the good fortune to cross paths with him in a handful of different ways, whether it was on environmental justice organizing, in trying to stop the pipelines, or on election reform. He was one of the first delegates to be really receptive to the idea of ranked choice voting and helped me start to learn how to be a strong citizen advocate. And I'll tell you that when I was first thinking about running, and I was going to talk to people and ask, whether is this a good idea? Is this something that I might do? I went and spent some time with some good friends of mine down in Richmond and who worked in this advocacy space. And I was asking them, is this something that I should do? And they said, absolutely, yes. And then I said, okay, well, who can I talk to about this? Because when you're running and you're brand new to politics, you don't really know who you can lean on as a mentor in the process. And they said, you can talk to Sam. You can trust Sam. You and Sam are cut from the same cloth. And I said, okay, Sam's great. I know Sam. He's great. Who else? And they said, maybe just Sam. Maybe you and Sam are kind of in a bucket all your own. And let me say that in the year that I've had the good fortune to serve, in some ways, I have found that to be true. We have fabulous colleagues of all stripes who bring so many different things to the table. But when it comes to someone who I really think of as sharing my core conscience and values and vision for what it means to be a public servant, I think Sam is really sort of in a field all his own. As you'll see in the time that we get to talk with him tonight, with Sam, what you see is what you get. He is one of the most sincere and authentic people that I know. He wears his heart and his mind and his spirit right out on his sleeve where you can see it. And so I'm so excited. I wish y'all could meet him in person, but I'm glad that we can tune in from afar and have a chance to at least get to know him a little bit in this way. So with that, I will hand things off to Sam and let him start to tell you a little bit about himself, where he comes from, and how he came to public service.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sally. It's thank you so much for those kind words, and to think about the story. And sometimes we flash back to those moments before we were, elected, and maybe just in the advocacy space, and then the kind of sequence of events that led us to where we're at today. For myself, I'm in my 8th year in the General Assembly and 4 terms, and it feels like it was yesterday. As a religious and ethnic minority growing up here in the western half of Virginia, it was always about building broad-based coalitions and meeting people where they're at. And that's how people ended up giving somebody like me a shot. Grown up pretty much my whole life here in the Roanoke Valley. And as I was thinking about, running for lieutenant governor there was really kind of two big buckets. One is, elevating the policy that I really care about, and I've been able to pass bipartisan legislation every full session that I've been in the General Assembly. Last year was around socio-emotional development, was around the Safe Drinking Water Act, community schools, which rethinks the way we model our campuses and moving forward, but also on the advocacy side, pushing back against the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, really joining you, Sally, in checking Dominion, and then thinking about how do we approach some of the crises intersectionally with the Green New Deal. And so as we've been able to kind of build this conversation around policy, that's always been interesting to me. But really where my heart has been is in the philosophy that we bring to these conversations. And so I boiled it down simplistically to the 3 rules that my wife and I raise our children with. We have 3 kids, and we have these 3 rules: always tell the truth, always be kind, never give up. And this truth, love, and grit is plastered all across our campaign. And for us, it's not just about that, it's actually the way we've operationalized our whole campaign. And really, if you think about it, our time in service, first by crowdsourcing a first of its kind people's platform where we're taking ideas from across the Commonwealth, and we welcome your friends to offer up their ideas on our website and uplift some of them. Second, when we're connecting with voters, not just asking them for votes and money, but also trying to connect them with the government services that they need, especially during this difficult time in COVID. This is the way we rebuild trust in institutions again. And then third, through Virginia Grit, every city and county in person in a safe way to gather stories all across the Commonwealth and uplift them. So can't wait to come to Charlottesville and Albemarle again and find some unique stories there. But what's truly historic about our campaign is that we're going to be the first campaign ever to win statewide 100% funded by individuals only. And we've had over 1,900 contributions in 2 months. People have really stepped up. And we've got this really great quote that we love to reference, which is by Ruth Bader Ginsburg: fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that leads others to join you. And so looking forward to joining members of your community and uplifting their voices.
Absolutely. It has been so much fun, I think, to see you run authentically like yourself. There's a lot of different ways to run a campaign. And I think, having only done it once, I do think how you run says a lot about how you'll serve. And I think that inclusive way, that transparent way, is part and parcel of the way that you approach public service. Since this is our first one of these statewide Q&As, we're doing them for all the different statewide offices, but I think LG might be the office that is least familiar to some folks. I think people have a pretty good sense of what the governor is, what they do. I think folks sort of understand the attorney general as the people's lawyer, but LG sits in a space that it might be a little less familiar to folks. Can you talk about what the LG does, and in particular, what your vision for that job and that platform is?
Yeah, in a lot of ways, the lieutenant governor position is actually what you make of it. So there's only a couple of constitutional responsibilities that you have. And so just make sure you're there to back up the governor if something were to happen. But most importantly, of course, to be able to cast those important tie-breaking votes as the person who's presiding over the Senate. And so that's constitutionally what you're supposed to do. But here's what else you can do. Number one, of course, working with the governor, whoever she or he may be, in trying to complement them, either bringing in the rural perspective, my passion for holistic child development, or there may be some other piece that makes the most sense to complement some of their agenda. Second, thinking through, to me, I'm still a member of the General Assembly team, and especially, of course, with colleagues in the Senate, but thinking through how I can be helping to help that team and advance a progressive agenda. Certainly, the lieutenant governor has a high platform with which she or he can elevate issues that are important to them. Third, continuing to do what we can do in this strong advocacy, like we have been pushing back against these pipelines. And really saying, there are certain special interests that need to be checked. This is an important voice for the people, and being able to take that to a whole nother level is important. But then lastly, is to do some really core party building. What we're doing right here in this race, it's not just to win. I am in this to win, for sure, because the validation of the things that I believe in comes in winning. It has to be won the right way. I want to prove that there is space in Virginia politics for the politics of trust, and to be able to show people that there's a better way to win. And I think that this can help us to expand, the empathy for a progressive agenda that Virginians can feel. So doing that at the party level, working with the state party, but also trying to challenge this traditional paradigm that sometimes is even shared by both parties, that, look, we just got to raise a bunch of money and throw a lot of mud and see what happens. That's not the kind of leadership that we need. And some would argue that that's gotten us to where we've been, especially over the past 4 or 5 years. So we're out to prove something. And we want to, beyond election day this year, forward at a larger level.
Absolutely. As the candidate in the race that has more legislative experience than any of the others, you've really seen a long arc of Democratic politics in Virginia. You know what it was like to be in that extreme minority. You saw what happened when all of those seats flipped in 2017, and suddenly Democrats were in striking distance of having a majority, and that how much of a tone shift that had in Richmond. And then you saw Democrats take over last year, and all of the good work that we have been able to get done since. As you look back on that, what are the big things that we've done in the last couple years that you're most proud of, that you think of as kind of signature Democratic steps forward? And then, what do you think of as the opportunities for pushing next in the spirit of what you said about party building?
In my district in particular, I have a challenging socioeconomic demographic. There's 86% free and reduced lunch, very high Medicaid utilization rate. If you go into inner city Roanoke, there are some parts where you can talk to some people who are really struggling, who don't see a difference in their lives between President Obama and President Trump. This is very difficult for some people on the left to stomach, because policy-wise, we can see clear distinctions. But for people who are struggling, making it day to day, who essentially, poverty to me is traumatic violence that is inflicted upon people. And that trauma, they see it in so many different ways. So there's clearly a lot more that we need to be doing to alleviate that trauma. And I liken that violence to all the other types of violence, like gun violence, sexual violence, domestic violence. And it's clear that it is a perverse issue in the richest country in the world and one of the richest states in the world. Some bright spots that we have been able to kind of hang our hat on that has helped a little bit. So many people have come to me and have had their right to vote restored. Literally hundreds of thousands of Virginians who couldn't participate in the voting process here in Virginia, who have been disenfranchised. During my time, I have watched this evolution occur, and it's bigger than a vote. It really is bigger than just their vote. It's like recognizing the dignity in people that they deserve, and to them they gain some of this agency that to me is important as a human being. It's the simple humanity of it, because I don't think that voting is a right, actually. I think that it is a basic, fundamental part of our democracy. And I think that even those who are who are, incarcerated should be able to vote. If you are in this country and you are a citizen, you should have the ability to be able to vote. And we created this narrative that certain people get the right versus others. And unfortunately, it's been used as a terrible tool over time. So to watch this happen has been great. And then a second thing that has been awesome to see is now the more than 400,000 Virginians who have gained access to healthcare through our Medicaid expansion that's happened in recent years. And we still have a system that needs a lot of work. It's very flawed. But just to have that basic access now just dramatically changes people's lives. So there's a lot to look back on this past year, especially when we've been able to accomplish so many different things. But those are kind of two larger pieces that I really am, I think, most proud of.
I think one of the other things that you've done, as you said, when it comes to party building, is not just being proud about those policy victories, but also reconceiving of how the Democratic Party relates to people through your Democratic Promise work and through you write the bill programs with constituents. I know that people who know you well know that kind of work, but perhaps for folks who might be meeting you for the first time, can you talk a little bit about some of that local party work and building and really community service that you've done as an outreach of your post? Because it's not the norm. And I do really think it's kind of a signature Sam Rasoul thing. And folks should get to know that side of you too.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. So there's a book that I can send your way, or if folks are interested in kind of understanding how trust has worked in government for many years. And in the 1960s, some 2/3 of Americans had trust in government, trusted these basic institutions. And today it's less than 1/3. And so as the party that believes that these institutions are core to the collective success of all of us, we must be willing to, and in fact, invest heavily in building trust in these institutions. And what is the number one way to build trust today? Well, what we do know, the neuroscience kind of tells us, number one is transparency. Transparency is always, today it is the number one thing that builds trust in institutions. Related to that is accountability. And then also, the inclusiveness. And so what we have done is a couple of programs that you had mentioned. There's kind of a few different ones, but two that I'll highlight. One is the You Write the Bill program, where we actually would bring, we've done it several times, we bring constituents together. And it's a 3-part workshop in 3 months, where we bring folks together, we group them and then subgroup them based upon their interests. And then they come up with bill ideas. And then we have those bill ideas drafted by the attorneys in the legislature, the Division of Legislative Services. Those drafts then come back for the second part of the 3-part series. We fine tune the bill and then begin to think about what would the advocacy portion look like. And then we come back for the third one, finalize the bill and develop a lobbying plan. Like what legislators should carry this? What do these committees actually look like? Who would be our natural allies should we want to get this thing done? Last year we passed House Bill 99, which helped to protect victims of domestic violence from being discriminated against when they are trying to find housing. So if you're a victim of domestic violence, many times you are constrained economically to a relationship. And if you're trying to pull yourself out, one difficult thing is to actually find housing to go into to try to set yourself free. That was an idea birthed out of a You Write the Bill participant who she herself had been through it, but never knew how to possibly change this law. So remember, the problem was trust in institutions. That building the trust is what helps us advance a progressive agenda that helps people. And so then here's a way. Oh, you're frustrated. You don't know how the process works. Here's how it works, and we're going to work through it step by step. And one of the best comments that I had, Sally, was after the first session that I did, somebody came up to me and they said, writing bills is hard, and Sally can appreciate that. There's good ideas, but then putting it down on paper. And then the second program that I'll mention briefly is the Democratic Promise, which you mentioned, which we started a few years ago, where we literally are contacting voters just to build goodwill and proactively seeking out problems that they have. So it's just proactive constituent services. Instead of waiting for them to contact us, we would contact them and say, hey, you having a problem with government services? Can we help you case manage it? And boy, 99.8% of people do not have a problem, but they love the fact that you called and didn't ask for money or for votes. You just called to check on them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that if we as progressives, if the progressive product is collective action, then trust has got to be a core progressive value, because you can't get people to collaborate if they don't believe in each other. I think that's a really special part of how you've seen your role in public service. Another special thing that I think that you bring to this race in particular is the regional variation. I think people are used to thinking of our Democratic strongholds in Virginia as being in the urban crescent, in Nova and in Richmond and in Hampton Roads. Nearly all the candidates, particularly for LG, are in Nova. And all of the statewide candidates, including governor and LG, are from that urban crescent. You are the only person running statewide from the western part of the state. And I know as us out here in Charlottesville, we're used to sometimes having those folks think of us as the rest of Virginia. And I sure felt that as a legislator in some ways. Would love to hear you talk about how I think that affects how you do your work, the voice that you bring to Richmond, but also how you approach the campaign and what it's going to mean for this race.
Yes. The way I think about it and the way I discuss a lot of these issues is certainly being able to bring a perspective that is from the western part of Virginia. But, we don't want to necessarily fight a regional battle. So the way you do it is you talk about the equity portion of it, right? We should all be able to start with at the same point, whether it be in education, transportation, some of these other issues. And so if you approach it not from a defensive posture of my side of the state needs more attention, we need more resources, but from an equity perspective, there are some services and some issues that they have that are unique to Fairfax County that we should put more emphasis on that we don't have here. And then there are a lot of issues here in the western part of the state that I would ask Fairfax County to be sympathetic and empathetic with some of the struggles that we have that are unique here. And I think that, when we play the regionalism the wrong way or the tribalism the wrong way, it becomes a zero-sum game. And talking to an economist here, you can probably appreciate the increased utility when we find a different way of approaching some of these issues, where we can work together to try to figure out, where we can, lean on each other the most. And so that's the challenge that is before us, is to try to look through that equity lens. And so that's what we want to make sure we bring to this conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's something that I knew to be true in principle, but it falls in stark relief once you get to Richmond, is just how many of the issues that are so core to the challenges in our most urban and dense communities are the very same ones that folks in the more sparsely populated areas are struggling with. Sometimes people think of broadband access as a rural problem, but it's just as much a problem in a lot of parts of Richmond that are really internet or deserts. And so I think that you've been a really natural coalition builder among folks who care about attacking everything through an equity lens. Maybe now, with that said, would be a good time to start transitioning to some of the questions that we've been getting in the comments. I think this theme of equity that you've been talking about is really resonating with folks. One of the people who has written in here, Ellie, asked a question about equity as it relates to one of the very important topics that we're taking up in this coming session, which is legalization of cannabis and the broader project of expunging past records due to harm from the war on drugs, and then how do we build a more equitable future going forward to repair that harm and have equitable access to that industry. Can you talk a little bit about how you think, what do you think it means to legalize it right, as people like to say here in Virginia?
Yeah, you know, the 200-page bill has just dropped, but I will tell you that I struggle to envision a bill that does it correctly in a short session in the middle of COVID. I was a co-patron on Jennifer Carroll Foy's bill last year, which was the most aggressive bill, which was legalization, but really essentially is full decriminalization. And I think that the way we really should approach the conversation is to think about the legalization separate from commercialization. And to me, what has happened historically in Virginia, when we have these big decisions to make, is that the commercialization piece, when there's money involved, that a few special interests really get to take advantage of the situation. And to me, as Sally knows, I'm very sensitive to the economic piece of this, of these big conversations, whether it be how we approach environmental challenges or how we approach this as well. I know that they wanted it to be one big bill. It probably would have been wiser to have two separate bills, just so we don't feel like, we know that this part's not perfect, but it's got this other thing tied to it. It's very intentionally done that way. And to me, that's really not fair to the people, because you can't make me choose that it's okay for them to extract wealth over here because expungement's happening over here. It's just not fair. And so I think that we should be doing the real legalization, the expungement, the criminal justice reform piece of this, which is the lens that is most important to me. That should be a separate conversation from the commercialization piece. Of course, that's not the way the bill is written. That's not what is happening right now. We'll see how the conversation evolves. But I have made it very clear that it is very difficult for me to envision that. But I haven't gone through the full bill, and I will be optimistic that we'll have some good news.
Yeah, I think that's right. So it's something that's very common in Congress in DC, where they make these big bills and try to tie a lot of stuff together. So you have to swallow something that you don't care for in order to move forward on something else that you do. In Richmond, we tend to try to tackle one topic at a time, except every once in a while you'll get these big controversial bills where they lump things together for exactly that reason, so that you don't get to take each issue apart at a time and try to get the best version of that. We've got, how do we deal with the harms of the past through expungement, and how do we legalize, as you say, in the present so we don't commit those harms going forward. And I really like that distinction between legalization and commercialization, because commercialization is about how do you sell it more for the future. For folks who are just tuning in, please, whether you're on YouTube or Facebook, please feel free to drop a comment or a question in the chat so that we can make sure that you get the questions that you want answered from Delegate Rasoul here, who is running for lieutenant governor. Another big topic where I think that there's so many good ideas swimming and a lot of interconnectedness that you've really been a champion on has been on how we confront our climate crisis in an equitable way. You want to talk a little bit about your vision for that and your leadership there, and how you think we can take important next steps?
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And we had lots of great conversation last year around the Clean Economy Act. So the way I think of this is that there is a climate crisis that needs to be addressed with the fierce urgency of now. And we can utilize that as an excuse to address the other crisis, which is, to me, the income inequality that we face in our country. For the past 40 years, we have just seen that skyrocket, and even this year, outside of a small positive blip because of the payments that were coming in from the stimulus for a small period of time. People it's really a struggle. And so imagine an approach to the climate crisis in such a way that it intentionally goes in and makes investments and uplifts what we call environmental justice communities. These communities that are vulnerable economically and otherwise. To me, this is the real ethical way to approach it. In fact, to me, it's unethical to approach it in a way where we say we need to make these investments, but it further exacerbates income inequality. At the very least, we should do no harm. But what we saw last year, and it's been further validated through many other pieces of reporting, that here we passed a climate plan which was modest at best, which is going to increase people's electric bills by 40%. That is clearly unethical, and that actually hurts the environmental movement long term by undermining, because in 5 years, those who are not sold on the climate crisis or have other intentions are going to look back and say, look, I told you your bill was going to go up, and people are going to be like, well, why did this just happen? And they're like, well, don't talk to me about any of this renewable stuff for a while, because you've really messed me up thus far to build some expensive wind project. So we undermine our environmental goals, and the movement, while exacerbating some of the income inequality when we don't approach this the right way. But if we think intersectionally, how do we intentionally bring up, from a social justice perspective, communities that have been neglected for a long time? How do we ensure our union brothers and sisters are uplifted and Virginia workers have a real fair shake in this? And how do we aggressively do our part as Virginia, do our part to approach the environmental crisis and be a leader in all of this? Because we know objectively it can happen. There are plans out there. There's analysis that show that this can happen in an aggressive way. That intersectionality, that's where the future of not only the environmental crisis is, Sally, but that's the future of the progressive left. The progressive left will not be able to achieve the progress it needs to without forging these intersectional coalitions.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. And I think the point that you made there is really important, that if you care about environmental progress, you have to care about the economics, because we will undermine political support for progress on climate change if we don't. I think sometimes the leaders of the environmental movement tend to come more from the upper ranks of the income distribution in Richmond, and they can sometimes be a little insensitive to the economic realities of the people who are paying their prices for those bills. Some people hear that, what happens if their electric bill goes up by $20 or $30 or $40 a month. And some people say small price to pay for combating climate change. And they don't know that in my inbox right now, I have a note from a woman who's trying to figure out how to get $8 back on her SNAP benefits, because that's what's keeping her from paying her grocery bill this month. And so, we've just got people who don't appreciate that for some people, $8 is a lot, and for some people, $800 is a lot. And, we need to make it possible for them to see eye to eye, because, otherwise we're not going to be able to bite off this big crisis together. We've got other good questions in the chat, and please feel free to keep them coming. I want to make sure that you get answers to the questions that you care about most. One question from Boyd Walker, a very specific one here, but I know it's going to be another hot topic in session. And that is the death penalty. The governor has recently announced that he would support abolishing the death penalty in this upcoming session. Sam, do you want to tell us about what you think about both that personally, and also, what might happen in the coming weeks in Richmond?
I feel like that there's great support for it. I can't wait to support it. I've been fighting hard for many years with different types of administrations and trying to push back against it. We tried to fight against, the secrecy around the chemicals used in lethal injections for years. Finding innovative ways of trying to stymie the death penalty here, because in Virginia, the way we approach it, for example, there's an extremely high bar that you have to meet to be able to be found not guilty by reason of insanity, or to be found, not within in your wits, for Virginia. That's been intentionally the case for a long time. So, a couple of years ago, we put to death someone who clearly was mentally ill, but because we didn't have this bar for him, sadly, he perished. So can't wait to support it. I'm glad that the governor has stepped up to lead on the issue. I'm hoping that there'll even be bipartisan support for it, because I will tell you that I have, had great conversations with some of my Republican colleagues over the years, and people see, the need for us to evolve as a society on this issue.
Absolutely. I think that one of the things that you've always been such a strong champion for in Richmond is standing up for our most vulnerable communities, people that might go overlooked by others, but really take center stage for you. One question that we have coming in from Facebook right now from Judy is about another one of those vulnerable communities who has been waiting too long for fair help from Richmond, and that is disabled Virginians. Who, particularly when it comes to Medicaid expansion, like you talked about, many people are still waiting on a very long wait list for the Medicaid waivers that would get them the support that they need. Can you talk a little bit about what you think about doing more to support disabled Virginians, particularly when it comes to things like housing and work?
Yeah, as a society, we're really only as good as we treat our most vulnerable. And I think that we lose that perspective. And, there are so many great friends that I have who are persons with disabilities who even find ways of pushing through and adding a lot of value to our Commonwealth and to society as a whole. And so for me, the easiest thing that we can be doing is to sit here and make sure that our policies are not discriminatory in nature. So this is kind of the most basic piece, and we've achieved some progress there, but we have some more work to do. Sometimes those policies, they are at odds with our never-ending need to become number one for business. And so, look, as a person with a business background, I understand that there's a tug and pull in the business world. But we need to appreciate that we're in this together, and so that's the very basic. Beyond that, how do we think about ways for those persons with disabilities throughout our ranks, for them to be able to self-actualize as much as we can? And that, as a society, is probably a larger conversation that we haven't broached as effectively as we should. But there are more and more bright spots of individuals who are showing us that there are ways of doing this for sure. And so I hope that we can continue to find employment practices, certain investments that we can be making, very specific programs. Even if you think broadly about how do we we've been battling how do we these students who are just coming out of school, 18 to 21-year-olds who are persons, young adults with disabilities, who are in a tough transitionary period. We've tried to even do a little bit more in recent years on that, but there isn't always that safety net that they have as parents age out, and as housing becomes more and more difficult to attain, at least safe quality housing. These are just some of the basics that we should make sure that we've got front and center.
Absolutely. I think you mentioned something that gets tossed around a lot in Richmond, Virginia's ranking as the #1 state for business. But I bet a lot of folks who are tuning in tonight know that we hold a less reputable ranking as the worst state in the country for workers. We really are bottom of the barrel on a number of standards of fair work and fair pay. as you think about going forward, maybe not just this session, but as the kind of projects you might try to steer as Lieutenant Governor, what would be some of your top priorities for bringing us out of that basement and into the kind of leadership role that we know Virginia would like to have?
Yeah, let's talk about realignment. Realignment for a moment, okay? Because a lot of the policies we talk about are, worker versus business. But what really, I don't know, I mean, the chamber doesn't really represent the interests of Main Street, Virginia. You've got, certain large businesses who have their interests, and they are dominant players in these chambers or in these other interest groups. And so if we think about a realignment that works for all of us, we think about maybe challenging the framing. Instead of workers' rights and policies that help workers, what about if we framed it where we're thinking about blue-collar Virginia? What does that mean? Who are those folks who are trying to make ends meet and get the work done every year? To me, that's like Main Street businesses, the mom and pop shops that I see there in Charlottesville when I'm there. To me, that's the gig workers who are active in lots of parts of society, and it's obviously been growing significantly, especially with millennials who consider themselves gig workers, and our traditional workers. And so if we think about realignment and reframing, and we build newer coalitions, then all of a sudden, okay, yeah, we probably need some policies that are empathetic to mom and pop shops or the Main Street, Virginia, while at the same time thinking about workers. And if we can build that realignment, the political realignment, then it gives us a better and stronger base with which to push these progressive policies along. And so to me, as a candidate, but as a delegate, and then as your lieutenant governor, what I'd like to do is to be able to challenge some of these paradigms that we have, so that way we can really wholeheartedly try to advance some of these policies and play some offense and not just defense.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. So often we get told in Richmond when we're trying to do something that actually would be really great for workers and a lot of business owners that it's a move that will rile business. And I say, which business? Because lowering everybody's electric bills is good for every business except the electric company. Bringing down health insurance prices is good for pretty much every business owner too. All of the business owners that are paying high prices from our monopolies, big companies like Amazon, they're paying higher prices for all of those inputs too. So it's often that it's not bad for business, it's bad for a business. Mm-hmm. And that business gets a louder voice in Richmond than some others because they have the full suite of lobbying core. So I think that's spot on. One of the questions that we've got coming in right now is about one of the big projects that we had over the last year in our special session, which was justice reform, which I know is so important to both of us and so many of our colleagues. And the question is specifically related to a bill that I happen to be carrying this session, which is about defelonizing the simple possession of drugs. I'm carrying a bill that would move all of those crimes out of felony charges and into misdemeanors so that you couldn't have an incarceration sentence longer than a year, with the goal of that really being the first step on a much longer road toward changing the way that we handle substance abuse challenges. How do you think about, I really think that the question is sort of a bridge toward, what do we do as those of us who care about tearing down these bad systems of oppression and mass incarceration in particular? How do you think about what we replace them with? Because I think we know that it's one thing to tear down bad laws, but building up the good systems that replace them is a whole nother challenge. What do you think about as we start to tear down the bad systems of criminal justice in Virginia? What should come in their place?
So your bill, great. Looking forward to voting for it. I hope that I get to, number one. What should come in their place? So people are thinking about, usually we think about people making the decision to carry or to do drugs, right? We, as a society, as a race, as the human race, meaning, we kind of think about, oh, this is a bad thing, and the bad thing should be punished. And punishing the bad thing will be what deters the behavior. And sometimes that happens, but as an economist, you can, predicting human behavior, is one of the hardest things to do, and that's why it is something that's so fascinating to study. And so, like, even with my children, I understand that there are, I need to use 3 or 4 times more carrots than sticks. And I try I've come up with that ratio myself, but to make sure that I'm not just with sticks all the time, that I've got a lot of carrots. So how do you actually do that? Well, not to be too tangential, but what I really believe is one of the first things you do is, from a very young age, you arm these young students with the socio-emotional foundations that they need. When an individual has the ability to be able to understand their emotions, articulate them, work well in teams, is self-confident, self-motivated, has self-control, then as they age into middle school and high school, they actually have the resiliency to be able to make better decisions for themselves. And oftentimes these decisions, they spiral in one direction or another. And so at some level, it becomes kind of abstract and fluffy, but when you break it down, now there's actual real curriculum that we can go to a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old and begin that process to building a very confident and secure and resilient 10-year-old, 12-year-old, 15-year-old, and have them make those decisions themselves to say, no, this is probably not what's best for my body, because my body is my temple, and I want to protect my temple, because that's one thing that I personally have control over, and nobody can take that away from me. This is the positive affirmation there, as opposed to, I made a mistake, and with this mistake, I am branded for the rest of my life, and it becomes so difficult for me to be able to crawl out of this abyss that society has created for me. And so, that's a very, so your bill, for example, is one way to start to kind of turn that corner from that abyss that we've created. But then philosophically, how do you approach it kind of holistically? That's the way I view a lot of these issues.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. If we think about all of the things we've built up in law to try to punish people who use drugs, those punishments are rarely the reason why people don't use drugs in the first place. It's not why somebody chose not to start using drugs. It's because they were scared of going to prison. It's because all of those other internal and external environmental supports that you're talking about. And I think it's high time that our public policy reflect that as well. I think that we are starting to get to the end of our time. So I want to remind folks, if they want to get in one last question, either on YouTube or they're on Facebook, please feel free to drop it in the chat now if you got a burning question that you want to make sure you get answered here in our last few minutes. But maybe I will also offer Sam an opportunity to talk about anything that we haven't touched on that's real important to him. I know he's got lots of things that he's excited about working on, both as a legislator right now and then in the future as lieutenant governor.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I make a quick plug, samforva.com, where people can actually give some of these policy recommendations to the People's Platform, or people want to, volunteer to do some of our kind of new age approach to reaching out to voters and connecting them with some of the government services that they need. And then you can also see some of the stories that we've gathered around the Commonwealth, like going to, which I didn't even know existed. I went to the tip of Virginia, which is further west than Detroit, if you look at it on a map. Quiz question for your friends. And it's Lee County. And in Lee County, there was the Appalachian African American Cultural Center. And it was a center all about African Americans in Appalachia and their contributions to society. And so you can see some of these stories as well, which are important. As far as this session is concerned, things that we'll be focused on, our COVID response in healthcare, education, and small business, I think will be top of mind for a lot of folks. And I will say to everyone that's watching, I think today was probably maybe the worst day in Virginia for COVID. We had 10,000 new cases in one day. Part of that is the lag in reporting a little bit, but it's still a massive number. This is the result of our holiday season, which we are now just now seeing come to fruition. And so I implore everyone to, over the next couple of weeks in particular, to really be diligent, stay away from these small groups or these enclosed spaces if they can, try to be very safe, because we're at a difficult time where vaccines are not really prominent yet. I mean, it's going to take us several more months for us to get to a good spot, but we're at the worst numbers right now. So I hope people will be safe.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the ever-present challenge lurking in the background of everything we do right now is our long battle with COVID, which has good news on the horizon as folks are starting to get vaccinated and those steps, but we're by no means out of the woods yet. I think next week when we've got ourselves a new president, the wheels will start to churn on our country again in a new way, and we'll be getting the treatments and the vaccines that we need out to communities in a whole new way. But until then and through then, in the next few weeks, we've still got a long ways to go. And so it's important that we, even though I know we're all very weary of this long year, that we not let slip and that we stay very diligent. Let me then maybe with the last few minutes that we have, ask you to kind of talk about how you want people to talk about you. I think a lot of the people who are tuning in tonight, we've got 30 or so on YouTube and another 30 on Facebook. We got folks coming in from all over Virginia. A lot of the times the people who are tuning into something like this, they're spending their Sunday night in January vetting a lieutenant governor's candidate for a primary that is almost 6 months away. These are some of the most engaged Virginians. And so I know they're going to be real community pillars who are talking to their friends about what excites them. They're the kind of people who get asked, who are you voting for? And, as you think about how you want them to talk about you to their friends when they say, why are you excited about Sam Rasoul? What makes Sam different? How do you think about that? How do you want people to talk about you?
Well, I'm gonna cheat, and I'm gonna grab a book back here underneath my sign. So there's a couple of I'm talking about one book, but I'll make a quick plug. If you haven't read Between the World and Me, if you like criminal justice reform and you wanna, this book is like, I want to read a whole book about every page in this book. So there's a quick plug. But your question was about how to think about the way I approach politics. So there's another book called New Power, and it doesn't have everything in it, but it has some pieces in it that really I use in some of my training. So another initiative that we didn't talk about was called the Impact Center. The Impact Center helps some of these more rural candidates to make sure that they've got some basic resources that we've been, in last cycle, we helped 25 House of Delegate candidates about, but we also do training. And so for the past 4 years, I've trained 2,000 candidates, activists, organizers in this kind of new paradigm, which is bringing neuroscience, moral psychology, kind of the best of new relational organizing into politics. And the way New Power helps to kind of crystallize that is the way power has shifted in American politics. The old style was to get elected and have a list of stuff you're going to do and go tick those things off and put your name on them and then go remind everybody, this is what I did. I built this. I got money for this. I passed this bill. Ain't I great? You need to follow me. Don't forget to vote. The reality is power has changed. And very quickly I realized, now I'm in my 8th year, but very quickly I realized early on, my job is not to do that, but to act as a platform that coalesces resources and connections. And then when people come and say, I've got an idea and I'm ready to work hard for it that improves my community or my commonwealth, I need some help. My job is actually to empower them to do that. And so we anxiously try to wait for these ideas to manifest themselves, and then we know what to jump on. We go in that direction. And Sally, I don't know if it comes to mind, but even when Sally comes to me, people are always happy about and excited about their bill ideas, right? Their ideas, I'm bringing it to you. I hope you'll support it. But like for me, even with my team in the House, I can't wait for somebody to bring me a progressive bill, and then for it to be their bill and their thing, and for me to brainstorm with you, Sally, as maybe we've done a couple of times, as you might recollect. How can I make sure that Sally's as successful as possible in what Sally wants to do? And to me, that's self-actualizing for me, right? For me, like I self-actualize by doing that, by helping you be successful. And so it's kind of a reframing and a new paradigm, if you will, of how to approach leadership and how even power works, because people want to elect people who are going to empower them, not because they are hoarding the power, as we've seen traditionally. This is the way it's moving, and so that's what I hope people will keep in mind about our experience.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think that there's sort of an older mindset in Richmond that views power as a pie. It's a scarce resource and you can slice it up and there's only so much of it to go around. And every little bit that some new person gets takes away from someone else's. And I think that's very much the opposite of how you and I approach our work. It sounds a little bit corny, but I do think it's true that empowered people empower other people. And that makes it possible for us to do more work, because I think it starts from the perspective that there is no shortage of good work to go around, that the challenges that we have are far beyond the reach of any one of us. And so if you think about it from that perspective, how do we get as many people on the team rowing together so that we can take on all of those challenges? Then when you find somebody who is energetic and excited about digging in, you're thrilled to meet them, because you can say, man, we could always use another good teammate. So I think that is absolutely the kind of colleague that you've been to me in my time in the House. It's why I'm so excited to have folks in our community get to know you as we're winding down tonight. I sure hope that in the not too distant future, we will be able to see you again in person. But for the time being, I want to say thank you for joining us tonight in this format. To everybody who tuned in and took time to ask a question, we will be back in here, same great place, same great station, 7:00 Sunday nights, talking to more folks who want to serve us statewide. Sam, thank you so much for tuning in tonight and for joining me. Is there anything else you'd like to share with folks before we sign off?
No, I just want to thank you. And for those who are wondering what Sally is like in Richmond, just a thoughtful. First, I love having an economist. I had to take economics classes in my curriculum, but I always loved economics, and now to have an economist, and I can just kind of turn to Sally in the room and be like, well, somebody's got some opinions, but let's ask the economist actually, who might be able to validate something for sure. But also a wonk who wants to get in the weeds and work hard for everyone. So all of you in the Charlottesville, Albemarle area, I hope that you're enjoying working with Sally, and just know that you've got an asset in someone who represents you very well.
Well, thank you so much, Sam. That's very kind of you. Well, folks, thank you. I think that's all we've got for tonight. As always, please feel free to reach out to me in all the ways you can, on Facebook, on Twitter, Instagram. Drop me an email. Give us a call or a text at the office. Lots of things are moving. We are back in action in virtual Richmond at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. We've got committee meetings lined up. So I know that that's where we will all be back to. But so thank you so much for tuning in and for giving your time. It shows that, just how much you care about making sure that we've got good leaders in Richmond. And with that, I will say good night. I'll see you tomorrow, Sam.
Good night.
Bye-bye.